Hello and welcome to episode 96 of Linux After Dark. I'm Joe.
I'm Chris.
I'm Gary.
And I'm May.
Welcome back all. A few episodes ago we revisited the topic of the lowest end hardware that we'd be willing to daily drive. But that was for desktop stuff. It got me thinking, what is the lowest end hardware we'd be willing to use regularly for a headless setup, some kind of server? And for me, it's lower than I thought it would be.
So I struggled with this one because my mind immediately went to what is the oldest piece of hardware that I'm currently running that is a headless box. But that isn't necessarily the most low end. The oldest thing I've got running, as I've said before, is the 3rd gen Xeon box that I have running in OVH. But I don't think I could say that's low end because that is 8 physical cores, 64 gigs of RAM. Like, it's not really low end, right? So I had to compartmentalize low end and old in my head. And I think I came to the Synology that I've got running at home. And more importantly, I guess, a VM that I have running on the Synology that I have at home.
Oh my gosh, me too.
So the Synology that I have has a Gemini Lake Celeron. It's a J4125. And that is from late 2019. And the VM that I've got running on it runs a couple of containers. It does a couple of rsync jobs. It's my DNS server. It's a reverse proxy. And that is running 2 cores of that J4125 with 4 gigs of RAM. And that is probably about as slow of a headless box as I think I would be willing to use. Could probably get away with less RAM, but equally the Synology's got like 16 gigs in it. So why not assign some of it to the VM that does actually run critical stuff in my house?
That's a beast of a box. I've just looked up the pass mark for it. 2940 for multi-thread and over 1,000 for single-threaded.
Yeah, but then I'm running a VM in user space QEMU on top of that. So I would imagine inside the VM, the performance I'm getting is way lower than that.
Yeah, but that's still significantly more powerful than my lowest end.
I think I have relaxed a little bit on what I used to do, but for ages I had an 128 megabytes of RAM supposed VPS. It's a bit weird because it was technically a container, but behaved as a VPS. And I used it until an apt transaction in Debian failed to fork and just bombed out because it didn't even have enough RAM to run package management. At which point I doubled the RAM to a massive 256 megabytes. And it was a fair share of a single CPU core on like a very old CPU. But it was only fundamentally a VPN server. And that was it. And so it was this weird hybrid between container and a headless box. But for quite a while, I was running a Raspberry Pi 3 with multiple containers on it and only 1 gig of RAM. And the actual CPU in that is pretty poor. And I think the thing with this is you're used to what you know, right? The main use for that box was Apache, which is a music server, Apache-based music server. And then when I moved off the Raspberry Pi 3, I had all the music on a thumb drive, like a 128 gigabyte Samsung, like stubby thumb drive. But I used it via WireGuard for listening to music out and about. And it was a little bit slow browsing through the library, but I wasn't unhappy with it. As soon as you move that box to more resources, I could never go back. You suddenly realize how bad it's been. I think, yeah, that's probably the lowest. A couple of cores and 1 gig of RAM is like a low-end VPS these days. I think that's probably about as low as I could go. Maybe half a gig of RAM if I was careful.
See, that raises an interesting point, Chris, because when we said headless box, I was thinking of pseudo general purpose hardware. But if we're talking VPN appliances and stuff, I'm using a GLINet Mango to talk to you via right now. And that's running a WireGuard tunnel back home. And it's got an 802.11n chip in. And I'm bridging the hotel Wi-Fi across it. And that's got an MT7688, which I think is just a single core MediaTek chip with 128 megs of RAM. And that's a headless box that is running OpenWRT and is bridging a couple of Wi-Fi networks and running a VPN absolutely fine.
Does that count, though? I suppose it does. It's not something I'd considered, but yeah, I suppose it counts.
It's a headless box running Linux, right?
Does it have to be running Linux?
Well, we are called Linux After Dark.
Ah, you're right.
Come on, May, what have you got stowed away under the table there?
Have you got a Windows server somewhere? Please tell me you've got a Windows server so we can laugh at you.
That would be insane. I do not. No, I was gonna take that same thread because I've got the MikroTik Hex S, which is probably significantly more performant than what Gary has, but that's my router.
Right. That's probably running Linux, isn't it?
I don't think.
Router OS is what? I don't know what it is under
I
there.
think it's a BSD. It might.
I would have guessed.
I have no idea. Either way, I guess I don't win. I think everything I'm running headless is about the same age, like 2016, 2017 era kind of stuff, which, oh my God, is 8 years now.
No, it's not. It's 2.
But yeah, I've got my Synology with a Celeron J3455, so an older one than Gary has, but about the same performance. And really the biggest problem with performance on it isn't the CPU. It's not hitting the CPU limits most of the time. It's hitting limits on the storage, because I've just got a couple of hard drives in it. Slow hard drives at that. So if I'm running a container that needs to do like npm install or something before it can bootstrap and run, oh my gosh, yeah, it's going to be a while. But if I put some SSDs in it, I think it'd be fine. Honestly.
That's what I was going to say. I think it's surprising the amount you can fit into very weak CPUs. And it's normally last on the list of what gets tight or exhausted. And it's much more frequently RAM or disk I/O.
I think for me, the question is, do I have to interact with this box or not? And so my offsite backup box, as discussed previously, is a J1800 system, which is very old and very shit, but doesn't use much power and is passively cooled, so it's pretty quiet. The initial setup for that was really painful, but now all it does is receive ZFS snapshots, and that's it. And so that's all automated. So I have very little reason to ever actually interact with it. And so it's fine, really. It does the job that it needs to do, and that's fine. But anytime I have to interact with it, like sometimes I'll just SSH in just to check that it's all good. It's just really, really painful to do anything. Whereas the Wise 5070 that I put in my parents' house, that's a pleasure. You know, it's not super fast, but I'm not like waiting on things. Like, you know, you do an apt update and it just grinds to a halt, the J1800. You're just kind of waiting for it to think about stuff. Whereas on the Wise 5070, it's not a problem. It just does things quickly.
I do think that Gemini Lake era, which is basically what Gary mentioned, I know he's carving up the turkey again for a VM, but that kind of era is probably about the lowest I'd want to go for something I SSH into, manage and run multiple services from on the daily. Beyond that, it starts to bleed from headless multi-purpose box into appliance type single use. You know, I have a Raspberry Pi Zero that's just collecting temperature and humidity stats with a Python script and bouncing it to a bigger box. You start to head into that kind of territory where you have to think. I think those boxes, those 10 watt TDP, cheapish, older Intel CPUs, that's where you think I could run things on this and not really have to think about what I'm doing if I get the storage and RAM right. But once you go lower than that, you start to think, oh, this is taking a bit of time, or I've not quite got enough here. I'm going to have to be patient and wait for disk access, or maybe tone it down a bit because I'm going to push the RAM, things like that.
Yeah, and I think that's why I initially said that Synology was about the lowest end machine that I'd be willing to use, because it's the only low end box that I have, aside from the Wise 5070s, that I'd be willing to go and throw a few containers at, or go and throw some batch replication jobs at, or leave running a large archive of footage or something overnight. Would I be willing to do that on something like your J1800, Joe? Probably not. Am I compensating a lot on that Gemini Lake box by having an SSD read cache in front of the spinning bus that's in it so that I don't come across the problems that May has? Also, yes. So it felt like it was somewhere in the middle of being a machine that was usable for actual stuff and not just being something that I turn on once a week and it runs a WireGuard client.
Okay, this episode is sponsored by people who support us with PayPal and Patreon. Go to linuxafterdark.net/support for details of how you can support us too. Patreon supporters have the option to listen to episodes without ads like this. And it's not just this show. There's Late Night Linux for news, discoveries, audience input, and misanthropy, 2.5 admins about system administration, Linux Matters for upbeat, family-friendly adventures, Linux Dev Time about developing with and for Linux, Hybrid Cloud Show for everything private and public cloud, and Ask the Hosts for off-topic questions from you. You can even get some episodes a bit early. We've got a lot going on, and it's only possible because of the people who support us. So if you like what we do and can afford it, it would be great if you could support us too at linuxafterdark.net/support. Well, I decided to go reductio ad absurdum with this and see what is the lowest end bit of hardware that I've got that I could actually do the things that I need to do. And my requirements are pretty low. I need to be able to do ZFS stuff, and Jellyfin is the other thing that I want to be able to. Can it run a Jellyfin server and stream media to another machine? And so I thought, what is the lowest end machine that I've got that I could realistically install a modern Linux distro on? So that discounted my old Inspiron, I never know how to say that, which is 32-bit only, and also my EPC, which is 32-bit only. So I looked around, and sure enough, my old MacBook Pro 17-inch, which has got a T7600 Core 2 Duo in it, which on paper has got a pass mark score of 798, but when I tested it, it was 446, although that was with DistroBox, because in Ubuntu 24.04, it's not supported, the Linux version of Passmark. So I had to use DistroBox to get 20.04, I think. So that probably explains part of it. And maybe the thermal paste is just rock hard as well. But after fighting with this machine for like 2 days to get Linux installed on it, which was so painful, having to burn CDs and stuff, I actually burned DVDs. And fun fact, Brasero, is that how you say it? The CD and DVD burning software on Linux, didn't seem to want to work with 24.04 on my machine that I used to burn DVDs. I selected the ISO and it just gave a weird error. So again, I used DistroBox to get 22.04 and then it worked fine. So I go through this incredibly painful process that involves installing Linux, it not working, installing macOS, installing Linux by the side of it, it not working, just trying loads of different stuff. Anyway, eventually I got Ubuntu on there. So not properly headless, but I installed OpenSSH and then treated it as headless. And you know what? It was painful to use. It was painful to install stuff on it, but it took the ZFS snapshots like a champ. It ran Jellyfin, no problem, even doing some CPU transcoding, and it worked fine. I could, in theory, not that I would want to because it pulls like 50 or 60 watts in a laptop, but I could, in theory, use that as a headless box, I think.
Well, go on then.
Well, I'm not going to, am I? That's the thing. It's going back in the drawer, obviously. Actually, it's weighing down the duvet that's hanging behind me, funnily enough, for sound dampening.
Sounds like a good use for it.
I do think, though, if your expectations are modest, then you can fit a lot more than you would think in, especially because you're a single user, essentially.
Yeah, that is the key to it, yeah. If you were trying to have several people streaming from that one device, it would just collapse immediately. But as a single user household, I think that I could get away with a very low-end system, ultimately, if I was willing to put up with the pain of actually interacting with it.
And if you're doing a good old-fashioned NAS, which is very uncommon, I feel like, these days, but actually literally just a box that serves files and doesn't also run containers, services, media servers and everything else, which is really what a NAS has become now. If it's literally just a file-serving thing, and if Jellyfin largely is running via direct play because the clients are You know, I know you said you did some CPU transcoding, but you really don't need a lot. But then, as you say, the power draw, you know, there's a crossover there where you pick a more modern piece of hardware, like the kind of comfortable point that we landed on, where you can get that same performance in far less electricity usage.
Well, I recently bought a Dell Optiplex 3020 micro tower, which has got a Core i3 4150 in it. I think it came with 8 gigs of RAM and a 500 gig spinning Rust drive. And it's too old for NVMe or anything like that. So I've had to plug in a cheap SATA SSD. But I got that for 20 quid, right? Now, the reason that I bought it was because really I needed a case for my other PC guts that I've got. It's a first gen i7 that just uses so much juice. And I looked around and about 20-ish quid was how much I could get a case for. And I got a whole computer for 20 quid instead. So I thought, well, it would be rude not to. I mean, it's basically just e-waste at this point. But this thing idles at 16 watts without disks. So that was just booted off a flash drive. And 14 watts actually once I turned the screen off and unplugged it, which is not amazing, but it's not painful, is it? For something that was 20 quid and is actually headless, a pleasure to use.
That's better than my Synology at power use, and it looks like it's about double the performance.
Yeah, and it's got 4 SATA slots, I think, and 4 standard SATA power connectors, although they are off the motherboard rather than the PSU. It's terribly proprietary in there.
But yeah, I think you can sort of get away with that. One of the things that's an extra concern for me is noise, as I think I've mentioned before. I would want things to run with fewer fans, which I've just about managed to find now. Everything's under my television in the living room, and you never hear it. Like if you turn everything off and you listen out for it, you can hear fan noise. And the scrubs on both those boxes are loud, especially the 1 litre little Optiplex. But it's always when everyone's asleep and away from where they are.
Well, it depends how much data you've got because it starts at midnight, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And it's funny, the smaller box only has a 2.5-inch Rust drive in it. It's a 2 terabyte laptop hard drive. Terrible idea, but it's mostly non-critical media that I could acquire again, or if I lost, it's not the end of the world.
You could rip from DVD again, get with the program here.
Yeah, that's it. And yeah, it takes about 3.5 hours and it's not full to scrub.
Versus the 12 hours that mine take.
Wow.
But I've got a lot of data.
How many terabytes is that as well?
It's about 8 or 9, I think.
Yeah, exactly. So you'd anticipate that. That's the thing to keep in mind. You don't need as much as you maybe think you need.
That's what I've learned by thinking about this. I feel like I didn't need to spend the 80-ish quid on that 8th gen HP box for my on-site backup. I feel like something like this Optiplex would have probably done for 20 quid.
And then you can buy 4 of them and just swap them in when they break.
Yeah.
As long as they don't take the drives with them.
Well, yes, indeed.
It gives you adaptability for reshuffles in the future, though, because one of the things we discussed is that the iGPU in that box could do a really decent job of quick syncing things up if you got Jellyfin working with it.
If I ever get it working, yeah.
But you've got future uses for the box, whereas if you go too old, it does the job. But if you ever wanted to have, maybe you've been put off after changing too much stuff, but if you wanted to reshuffle things, going a bit newer gives you more versatility of what you can repurpose things as.
Well, I could definitely swap out my current on-site backup with this Optiplex because it supports the AES stuff for the encryption, and that's really all I need.
Mm.
And I could bump the RAM up potentially to 32 gigs, I think, if I needed to, but I mean, 8's fine.
It's amazing how different this story is from what we want to use every day as our own machine. Like, once you don't need to run a web browser on something, the floor is yours.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Now, I did try a Raspberry Pi 5, and I had previously tried a Raspberry Pi 3, and the 3 was just too painful. I don't know why. On paper, it should have enough power.
It's the storage.
Yeah, I suppose it must be. But my Pi 5 has got NVMe storage, and that is not painful to use, but it's quirky, I think is the only way to describe it. When I'm sending snapshots onto it, It's sort of fine, but then it sort of randomly drops to a few kilobytes a second, goes back up to line rate, drops back down, and it's kind of all over the place.
Is it cooled well?
Probably not. No.
Yeah, so I don't have one, but from what I gather, the 4 was quite hot and the 5 is hot. And if you put NVMe in, presumably it's got no thermal pad or anything on it, right?
No, but the NVMe drive doesn't get hot because it's not running fast enough, because the interface just isn't fast enough to max it out. So the NVMe drive isn't getting hot. And I have got an active fan running on it.
Okay, yeah, that was going to be my main question, whether you had an active fan, but...
But you know what I decided to check, right? I've got my M1 Mac. I put Ubuntu Asahi on it instead of Fedora Asahi. And I decided to do the same test. And sure enough, with the same USB storage that I've tried with low-end x86 machines, had that same quirkiness.
So perhaps it's an ARM thing.
Gary, I remember you bought an M1 Mac Mini and you intended to use that headless, but it didn't work out. Was it weird quirkiness like this that made you not use it?
Yeah, it was weird quirkiness like that that made me install macOS on it and use it headless with macOS, which is a terrible idea. But yeah, there was just things like that that were never quite right. I was having to do all the storage over either USB or NFS as well, which contributed to some of the weirdness. But there were certainly things that just didn't work the way I expected them to when I was running that machine with what back then was a fairly early build of Asahi that was based on Arch.
Right, yeah. But I'll tell you another quirk was I was doing my testing and then I went to send a snapshot to it and it just hung. And then I looked at another terminal that was SSH'd into it and it said going down for sleep or, something like that. So, right, so it's gone to sleep. So I had to walk across to it, wake it up, and then anything attached via USB had disappeared. So I had to unplug it and plug it back in to get it to work. And I think I had to even reboot to get the storage to work properly.
You're making me think of that oft passed around photo of the laptop with its lid half shut and a paper sign taped to it saying, "Don't touch this, it's a server."
Yeah.
Well, you're just validating my decision to use the Mac Mini as a Plex server running macOS completely headless rather than install Asahi on.
Asahi and Jellyfin, that's what you should have done.
It's like the anti-free software thing, really, isn't it, at this point?
Pretty much. Well, I look forward to the emails telling us about the ridiculously low-end hardware that people are running headless. Show at linuxafterdark.net. We better get out of here then. We'll be back in a couple of weeks, but until then, I've been Joe.
I've been Chris.
I've been Gary.
And I've been May.
See you later.